educator and author, David Garlick.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I should have also mentioned when I was up with my happy things, saying that I also know Irene more Davis. I've known her for a very long time as well. I was teacher and vice principal for her stepkids. But that was, again, a few years ago. Before I came here today, I looked up Rotary on Google just to make sure I understood more about what you guys do. And having said that, I mean, I've been a volunteer for Rotary for a long time. The current president of Roseland Rotary is one of my best friends, Giselle Senior, and I've known her since the centennial in 1990 to 1992. So I've been involved with Rotary for a very long time. I know the good work that you do. But when I Googled you, I mean, in addition to getting rid of polio, in addition to trying to get rid of malaria, in addition to all the literacy programs around the world like Guatemala, in addition to the freshwater programs all over the planet and developing nonviolent leaders in Israel, this is the work that you do for fun. This is your extra time. And I thought your guest speakers must also reflect that as well. And the people that come speak to you must also be very important, very serious talks. And this isn't that, not at all. In fact, this is basically just going to be story time. It's probably the same in almost all professions that deal with people. But at some point as a teacher, almost everybody says, I should write a book. I should collect up the stuff that's happening to me every day, the stuff that I talk to my spouse about when I get home, the stuff that I talk to my friends about at the bar on a Friday night. And I should collect all that up and write a book. And for some reason, almost none of us do. I don't know why that is, but I decided a few years ago that I would. I'm not sure if people remember the beginnings of COVID, but at the time, it was also a time where everything was all things Trump. And every time I turned on the TV, watched the news or picked up a newspaper, there was something either depressing or something that made me angry. And if you know me at all, that's not me. I'm not an angry person. I have a very hard time losing my temper, but I found myself more and more getting upset with what was happening. And so what I did is I went upstairs to what used to be my work office. I closed the door, turned on the computer, and looked through an old file I have called Bare Bones Incidents. And what that was, I started Bare Bones Incidences in about 1992, 93, when things that were bizarre were happening to me at work, and I'd come home and I'd tell my wife, and after a time she said, I've heard enough of it. Like, just stop. So I would just write out these 2 or 3 sentence things that were meant to remind me of something funny that happened to me at work. And so when COVID started and I was getting frustrated and scared like everybody else, I turned on my Bare Bones Incidents and began going through them. And I found myself laughing, which is my normal state. And so I wrote them back up into the anecdotes that I told at the time. And when I finished one, I would send it off to a friend or a relative. And I'd say, what do you think? And people wrote back to me saying, it's really good. It reminds me of Stuart McLean. It reminds me of Garrison Keillor. And if you don't know who Garrison Keillor is America's Stuart McLean. And it reminds me of James Thurber. And if you don't know who James Thurber is the original Garrison Keillor and Stuart McLean. He wrote Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And I thought, holy cow, if I'm being compared with them, I'm making people laugh. Maybe I should write all these things out. And so I started collecting them. And I collected up about 48 of them. And so first of all, I should tell you this as a disclaimer. My book, The Principal Chronicles, is not an expose. It's not and angry, this is what the education system needs and what's happening, what's going on now. It's the opposite of that. This is a collection of about 48 stories that are intended mostly to make you laugh, a couple few to make you tear up. And from what I've been hearing from people that have picked it up, I've done a pretty good job. Now, I'm a fairly good writer, but I'm not a good artist. And so when I wanted some of the stories illustrated, I was at a loss because I can't even draw stick people very well. So I contacted my niece who lives in South Dakota, and I told her what I was doing, but I didn't tell her what any of the stories were about. I just said to her, okay, do me a favor. I need you to draw me a coffee can full of snakes. So she did that. She sent it back to me. And that's exactly what I was looking for. It's perfect. I need you to draw me a tornado, one of the big tornadoes with a cow stuck in it or a car or something like that. And so all the stories she illustrated for me, she did that. She hadn't read the stories until I sent her the finished book when it was published. So that's how the stories were illustrated. And what I should tell you about the book is that it follows me, not from when I became a teacher, but it follows me from preschool. So my memoirs start when I'm 4 years old, and they continue all the way through to post-retirement. Because I don't know what it is that I do, but I seem to attract weird things. And the stories are just all the things, not all, several of the things that have happened to me over the last 60 years. And the book is doing quite well. So in addition to making you laugh, though, one of the things I found from people who read the book is they tell me that when they finish it, they turn to their spouse or they turn to their significant other or anyone who's around them, and they start sharing stories themselves of things that happened to them in school. And most often they're stories that are funny as well. And I thought in these times, not just COVID, but now with everything else going on in the world, maybe that is something that's relatively important to do. So let me tell you a story. I've picked one out that it's from my time as a vice principal, and I won't tell you what school I was at, Forster. Your alma mater. But I won't. Yeah, I was a student at Forster. I was a teacher at Forster. I was a vice principal at Forster, and I was the last principal at Forster as well. And I guess I'm the only person that can say that.
Did you graduate eventually?
Eventually, I finished there in 2014. But having said that, this story is back when I was a vice principal at Forster Secondary School. And it's called Why I Bought a Cell Phone in the First Place. I remember a few years ago, well, actually more than a few now, visiting Europe with my wife and laughing at all the people we saw using their cell phones in public. Cell phones had yet to become omnipresent in North American society. Hey, look at me. I'm really important, we'd say, chuckling. Can you imagine, we go on to say to each other over our continental breakfast, can you imagine wanting to and actually being connected all the time? What could be so important unless you're a world leader or a surgeon or something? Well, now we know. Cheese for $4.88 is that. A third reminder about your music lesson is that important. And yes, people do want and need to be connected that much. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Parents call their children at school to ask them how their day is going and to tell them what's for supper, and yes, to remind them about their music lesson after school. I lost count of the number of parents who told me they needed to have that instant connection with their children. My mother just wanted me home before the streetlights came on. And when I was a bit older, just to try not to wake her up when I got home. And she loved me just as much as today's parents love their kids. She still does, as a matter of fact. I get it though. Times have changed. And cell phones aren't just phones. They're mini computers that connect you to the internet and all the information in the world. And they fit right into your pocket or your purse. So while I resisted the allure of the cell phone longer than most people, I admit to being a convert now. What was the tipping point, you ask? Why did I decide to move into the second half of the 20th century? I was a vice principal at a poor area high school. A lot of my families didn't even have telephones, let alone cell phones, or at least they didn't answer when I called. So at the end of each school day, I prepare a list of parents I needed to speak with, but hadn't been able to reach throughout the day. Maybe I had to inform them about an upcoming school council meeting or congratulate them on raising a fine daughter or son when a student had done something remarkable at school. Or, as often as not, I had to inform them that their child was suspended and was not to come to school the next day. I'd hand the parent the written suspension letter, explain what it said and what had happened, and I'd save the school the postage. At the end of each day, I'd take my list and head out the back door. Almost immediately, I'd be accosted by a group of elementary students on bicycles, skateboards, and rollerblades. Who are you going to extend this time, Mr. Garlick? I bet it's my brother. He's a jerk. What do you do this time? I was always pleasant with these kids, ignoring their questions and asking them about their days. And as soon as I turned up a street that wasn't theirs, they'd continue on their way. See you, Mr. Garlick. Have a good day. Once, I walked up to a house with the screen door closed, but the inner door wide open and the TV blaring. Judge Judy was passing sentence. I rang the doorbell and wasn't surprised when no one responded. The TV was that loud. I knocked on the door. I waited. No response. I rapped again, and called out pretty loudly, "Hello!" And from way down the hallway came this cute little boy in a diaper, or those pull-up things. He was pretty sure on his feet, but he was certainly no more than 2 years old. "Hi, little man." Big smiles from both of us. "Is your mom home?" Judge Judy had given way to a commercial about hand cream, which was even louder. "No." "Is your dad home then?" "No." "Is anybody home with you?" My smile faded. The toddler giggled and ran back down the hallway. I stood there waiting for someone to come back with the little boy, but nobody came. What was I to do? If I left, I was maybe leaving a 2-year-old unattended and everything that might mean. If I went into the house, I was trespassing, maybe even breaking and entering. I checked the door. Yes, it was unlocked. And if I entered, I just knew that at that moment, someone would come out and scream or chase me up the street or worse. And if I left now, knowing the screen door was unlocked, I also knew the toddler would come back to the door looking for the nice man in the suit, and he'd get hit by a train or smoke cigarettes or join a gang. I just didn't know what to do. If only there was some way I could maybe call the police, my principal, even my wife, so I could cry a little. Suddenly those cell phones didn't seem so silly. I rapped on the door again and called out. The boy's little head peeked out from, I don't know, the kitchen, where he was playing with knives. Maybe the stovetop was on, covered in pots of hot grease. I have a fertile but pretty realistic imagination. He toddled back up the hall to me. Used cars were apparently really cheap and available for no money down. Listen, could you do me a favor and turn the TV down? I expected him to pick up a remote control, I guess. I did not expect him to pull the bottom drawer of the chest that the TV was sitting on and climb towards the huge screen that I realized at that moment would fall over and crush him to death. Hey, it's okay, don't bother. Just a minute, he shouted back to me. And then the volume was turned down and he was running back to get his next instructions from me. Okay, good job. Now, I need you to cover your ears because I'm going to shout really loudly, okay? And he did. And I did for really about 30 seconds. 30 very long seconds. And then my student, The 16-year-old girl I was there to remind about her one-day suspension or inform her parents about came up from the basement. Oh, hi, Mr. Garlick. I was just downstairs doing my homework. No, she wasn't. After admonishing her for leaving her little brother unattended for so long and hand-delivering the letter of suspension I'm pretty sure her parents never saw, I marched straight back to school, got in my car, drove home, and told my wife, we're going to the mall after supper. I need a cell phone. I was that important. My wife likes that story, but she said it's not one of the funniest, Dave. It's more informative than funny. A lot of the other stories are funny, and it's difficult for me to choose which one to read each time I give a talk like this. But I like that story because it talks about what the life of a vice principal can be like. So I'm happy to entertain any questions if anyone has any.
Makes you look like not so much of a meanie. Vice principals are always the meanies.
They're responsible for discipline usually. Yeah, they're the ones that the hammers who are appreciated if they're hammers. But that was never my style. I wasn't very good at being a hammer. I wasn't a very good vice principal, being honest. It's a job that I never really wanted. But I only had I didn't mean for it to be a stepping stone. When Lowe was closing in the late 1990s, and Irene will remember this. In the last year that Lowe was open, the two vice principals at Lowe got transferred. One got promoted and one got transferred. And so Lowe didn't have a vice principal at all. And Elver Peruzzo, who I love, my boss at the time, he took me into his office and said, I'm going to ask the board for an extra half vice principal. Is that something you'd be willing to do? Could you be a half vice principal and half history teacher? And I said, yeah, I could do. How would that work? He said, well, you teach in the morning and be vice principal in the afternoon. And so I said, well, okay, I suppose I could do that for you. But that's not what happened. The last staff meeting of the year in 1999, I got called to the board office, and Suzanne, who was also a Rotarian, Suzanne closed the door and said, well, you know how both vice principals at Lowe have been. I said, yes. Well, Elver asked for a half-time vice principal. I said, yeah, and I thought I was supposed to act surprised. I didn't think I was supposed to know. And so I said, oh, half-time. Well, that's not going to happen, she said. I said, oh, would you consider being vice principal? And I'd never thought of that ever. Even when Elver asked me to be half-time, but I ended up saying yes, because otherwise they hadn't thought of who they were going to ask. And I just knew they were going to ask some poor schmuck from the county who didn't know the school, didn't know the kids. Oh, man. And then when we had close to 800 kids in the school, and I knew them all. So that was my only reason for becoming a vice principal. And like I said, I wasn't very good. I was a better principal, I think, and I became a really good principal by the time I finished.
I don't know anybody that can pass judgment. So
Yes.
always been like.
So where did you get the book published? Where is it for sale at?
It's for sale wherever fine books are sold. And I get to say that now because it is. It's for sale everywhere in Windsor. If you're from Windsor, it's available at both chapters. It's available at Biblioasis. It's available at Juniper. It's available at Storytellers. It's available at the Old Bake Shop in Sandwich. It's available at Whiskey Jack Boutique downtown. It's available at the River Bookshop in Amherstburg. It's available online. If you go to my website, dsgarlick.ca, all you have to do is click the links and you can get it just about anywhere online. And you can get digital versions or hard copy or softcover. It's published through Friesen Press, which is the largest employee-owned publishing house in the world. And so hardbacks from me are $35, and it's a bit of a deal. And soft covers from me are $20.
Maybe you just happen to have an extra one.
I just happen to have a few here, yes. Yes, sir.
What is the trend with regard to actual physical books versus electronic books? Do you have a feel for, where the trend is going?
The quick answer is I don't know. But I did find out some interesting stuff after having the book published. Amazon is the single largest book purveyor on the planet. Amazon is responsible for about 60% of all book sales in the world. And so for a time, I was on the Amazon bestseller list, which is really cool. If I opened up Amazon, there I am, number 5 in educator biographies, and number 7, for some reason, in immigrant biography. And I mean, there are a couple few stories that would fit into that category. But what I also found out is that Amazon's logarithm updates every hour. So you can be on the bestseller list for an hour. And so if someone goes in and buys 4 copies of your book and you happen to be in a little niche like educator biographies, all of a sudden you go from number 812 to number 5. And so I happened to log in when I was number 5, and I got a screenshot of it. So looks like that's kind of fun. So hard copy books are still doing very, very well. They're selling all over the place. In my personal experience right now, the digital versions of my books, which are far cheaper, obviously, because you don't have all the publishing paper and all the things that go along with publishing a book, you can usually get those for easily less than $5. And so a lot of people are opting for those right now too.
Any other questions? Have you heard from any of the students that might have accidentally been identified in your book?
I've talked to if there's a real name in here, and there are a lot of real names. In almost every case, I asked the individual who was okay if I used their name, and I would send in the story. The only person who ever should really be embarrassed if I used their real name is me, because very often the stories are
Your wife.
no, Linda can be embarrassed by her association, but I'm the only one that should be embarrassed by the stuff that happens in the book. So typically, people, when they read the story, said, yeah, that'd be fine. You can include my real name. Ones who were actually in the book, though, I haven't had a chance to speak to too many of them yet. Muhammad of the Split Head, I'd like to see again.
Irene has a question.
Yes, Irene.
That's her.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was your hand.
That's not her hand.
That's all right.
That's the coast.
People thought you had a question, Irene, sorry.
Tan colored.
Ilya.
As a graduate, what years were you there as a student?
I was student there from 1973 to 1978. I was vice principal from 2000 to 2002, and I was principal from 2008 to 2014. And Forster is turning 100 this year, the building, and we're holding a centennial celebration. In spite of COVID, it was very difficult to do any planning, obviously, but things lightened up to the point where we could go to Sandwich BIA, and they're going to be closing Sandwich Street on June 11th to vehicular traffic from 5 o'clock in the evening to 11 o'clock in the evening. And different decades of students will be meeting at different pubs throughout Sandwich. We did that for the 90th anniversary 10 years ago, and it turned out to be a great, great event. And we're also having a euchre tournament at St. John's Parish Hall at 4 o'clock, and a cake cutting ceremony and meet the teacher, and then we move throughout the town to our different decades.
I was 81 to 86.
Oh, really? A little bit younger than you. Please come.
Did you graduate at euchre?
Yes, I did.
Just about everyone. Just about everyone.
You got pretty good at it. He was there for 7 years.
questions? Any questions on Zoom?
I was gonna say, why did you need to, feel the need to put real names in the odd case? Was it just because of that spectacular name that actually? I get on?
As I wrote this, as I wrote the stories out, again, reassembling them from these bare bone incidents, I was pleased if I could remember the actual name.
Yes.
And so I put them in, and then once the stories were all done, I realized that in most cases, that there wasn't any reason not to use a real name. And so I was quite happy to approach the people and say, I'm writing a book. Your name's going to be in it if you want. If you don't want it there, I'm happy to change it. But there were several people, some who passed on, some who I just could figure out no way to contact. And I thought if I haven't asked them, I should change their name. So that's what it is. And in one case, I came up with what I thought was a great name. I was so pleased with myself. And it was a perfect West End kind of name. And I wrote the story, and it's a fictional story, this one. And because I'm on Facebook now, I hadn't been until September of last year. I was, going through Facebook, looking through the Forrester reunion page, and it turned out that the name that I came up with that was going to be in the book was a real kid, and a real kid that I worked with 23 years ago. Geez, can't do that. So I changed it, came up with a different name for him. So if tonight, when you get home and you think about the book, or you've purchased the book and you're flipping through it, please think about the stories that you want to tell as well, and share those with your spouse, your significant other, the person you're sitting next to. I think that is one of the most important things we can do right now. It's just laugh.
You're right. Perfect. Okay, we'll turn it over to Phyllis.
Hey, thanks, David. It's always nice hearing speakers talk straight from the heart about things that they are passionate about and that are meaningful to them. Thank you for sharing your story and your talents with us. Here's a small little token from our club to say thank you for coming out today.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Second.
Okay, he's gonna take a picture of